Welcome to Juran Institute's Quality Tools and Tutorials series, SIPOC Diagrams. In this quick tutorial, we will explain what a SIPOC diagram is, how to create a SIPOC diagram, and share an example to show how a real SIPOC diagram is created. First off, we must ask ourselves, what is a SIPOC? A SIPOC diagram is a tool used by a process improvement team to identify all relevant elements of a process improvement project before work begins, and helps to define a complex project that may not be well scoped. The tool name prompts the team to consider the suppliers, S, of your process, the inputs, I, to the process, the process, P, your team is assigned to improve, the outputs, O, of the process that should meet or exceed customer requirements, and the customers, C, that are to receive the process outputs. We will now go through the process of creating a SIPOC diagram step by step. Step 1. Begin by listing SIPOC. Remember, SIPOC stands for Supplier, Input, Process, Output, and Customer. Oftentimes, this can be created using a template in Microsoft Excel or other software, but can also be easily created using easel paper and post-it notes. Step 2. List the first and last steps of the process. We begin by listing the first and last steps to ensure that the boundaries of the process have been defined. Fill in the other major process steps. For each step in the process, always include a verb and a noun. For instance, complete audit. Do this for each step in the process. Your list should include 4 to 8 high-level process steps. If you end up with more than 8 steps in your process, you may not be observing your process from a high enough level. Take a step back and try again, limiting yourself to 8 maximum process steps. Use verbs when listing the steps of the process. Step 3. List the output of the process step. There may be more than one, so be sure to list all relevant outputs. Use nouns when listing the outputs of the process. Step 4. List the customers that use or need the output of each step. Step 5. List the input that is needed for each step in the process. There may be more than one, so be sure to list all relevant inputs. Use nouns when listing the inputs of the process. Step 6. List who supplies the inputs. Step 7. Complete the columns in this order for each step of your process. Now, let's take a look at the process of drawing labs and see how this process will fit into our SIPOC diagram. We will be placing our SIPOC into the following table, which is consistent with most SIPOC templates created in Microsoft Excel. First, we must start by listing out the column titles. Remember, SIPOC stands for Supplier, Input, Process, Output, and Customer. We now have the framework for our SIPOC diagram template. The next step in creating a SIPOC diagram is to list the first and last steps of our process. Remember, when listing your process steps, you want to use verbs to describe each specific step of your process. In this example, we are looking at the process of drawing labs. Thus, the first step in the process is to order the lab. The last step in the process is to report the results. Now that we have a defined beginning and end to the process, we can be sure to only include relevant elements to the process. We proceed by filling in the steps of our process that transform the inputs into outputs. In this example, these steps include collecting the specimen, transporting the specimen, and processing the specimen. Now, with a completed high-level process diagram, we are prepared to document the outputs, customers, inputs, and suppliers of the process. Let's take a look at our first process step, order lab. The next step is to list the output or outputs of this step. In this case, the output is order received in lab. Remember, when listing the outputs of a process step, always use nouns. Next, we take a look at the customer of the output for this specific step. In this case, the customer of the lab order is the patient. Now that we've documented the outputs and customers of this process step, we look back towards the required inputs. To order the lab, the process requires a diagnosis, a lab order, and clinical findings. Remember, when listing the inputs of a process step, always use nouns. The last piece to complete this step of the process is to list the suppliers of the input. The suppliers of the diagnosis, lab order, and clinical findings are the patient and the attending MD. We will now complete the columns of the SIPOC diagram in this same order for the remaining steps of our process. For the second process step, collect specimen, the output is labeled specimen. The customer is the laboratory. The input of the process is the lab order and phlebotomy supplies, and the supplier of those inputs is the lab tech and patient. For the transport specimen process, the output is specimen logged in lab. The customer of that output is the laboratory. The input of that process is the labeled specimen and receipt time, and the supplier of that input is the lab tech. For the process specimen process, the output is quality control check and test result. The customer is the lab tech. The input needed is the lab analyzer, and the supplier of that input is the lab tech. And finally, the last step in our process, report results. The output of that step is a plan of care and performance metric. The customer, patient and family, attending MD, and referring MD. The input required is the test result, specimen integrity, and result time, and the supplier of those inputs, the lab tech and nurse. If you would like to learn more about Juran Institute and our services, please visit us at our website, www.juran.com. You may also reach us by calling our 800 number, 1-800-338-7726, or emailing us at tina@juran.com. If you found this webinar helpful, please feel free to view our other tools and tutorials by visiting and subscribing to our YouTube page. You may visit it via the following link, www.youtube.com/Juran Institute. You may also be interested in reading and subscribing to our blog, The Big Q, on current quality issues and topics at www.juran.com/blog. You can also follow us on Facebook by searching for Juran Institute, or Twitter by searching for The Big Q. Thank you for your time.